process. And I'd like to say I wish we didn't have to do this. We didn't have to listen. But I think it's appropriate that all of us know where we are now in terms of county revenues and expenditures. And I'm going to just turn it over to Ms. Boyce to introduce the topic for us.
Well, before you have the mid-year financial report, and thanks very much to the departments and their fiscal staff who provided some data to the administrative office as they scrutinize their revenue and expenditures. And the purpose of this report is really to take a look at the first 6 months of the fiscal year and see whether we're on track as to where we would expect to be at mid-year or not. If there are trends that suggest that we may have some issues with our currently adopted fiscal year 09-10 budget and what we will be facing as we look forward to the fiscal year 10-11 budget. So what we did was we put together a report that kind of spelled out some of the agonizing decisions that were made last year by the board with the help of the workforce and the labor unions, and it was a tough year. There were concessions, there were eliminations of positions, there were deletions of positions, there were people who left for early retirement, and we're going to be facing some of those same options again this year, unfortunately, due to the deficit we're looking at. We're going to go through a slide presentation. We tried to pick out the bullets from the report that all of you have or have access to on the website. We'll take a look at how the budget was adopted in the fall, our revenues, expenditures, non-general funds, talk a little bit about the state budget as best we know it. We know all of you who are involved with any state funding know that every day is a new day on the state front, and there are no guarantees that there won't be additional cuts. In fact, we expect additional cuts on the state front once the state decides to deal with the ongoing budget deficit. We will ask the board for direction in the current year because we are facing what we expect to be a cash revenue shortfall, and also direction as we go forward to develop the budgets for next fiscal year. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Shirley Ryan, who has done this presentation, I think, for the board several years in a row.
Thank you, Jeannie. Needless to say, the preparation of last year's budget, or the current year's budget, I should say, 9-10, it was challenging. A few years ago, I think I sat before the board and made a comment that we were in recession, and unfortunately, that proved true. And many have stated in newspapers that it's been the worst recession since the Great Depression. I know that's a phrase I've heard numerous times. When we were looking at preparing the budget, we were facing over a $1.3 million decrease in the cash carry from our prior year. We went from in excess of $1.5 million to $183,000. Additionally, we were facing a 3.31 decrease to assessed property tax rolls, over $3 million in general fund revenues, and impacts that were put upon us by the state, including Prop 1A suspension, which meant the state could borrow up to 8% of property taxes and repay those within 3 years. Fortunately, when the state did adopt that as part of the budget, they also gave us the mechanism to securitize at no cost to the counties so that we would not, in fact, lose that $1.5 million for 3 years. So what did we do to try and balance that budget? Because we were facing some pretty significant shortfalls between the decrease in cash carry and revenues going down. We asked departments to submit a number of budgets and quickly realized that, especially if Prop 1A was suspended, we would be looking at a 7.5% reduction to the general fund contributions for all county departments. And so as departments looked at what they could do, making the cuts to services and supplies where they could, eliminating capital purchases, we also realized that 69, almost 70 positions were that were vacant at 7109 to help with the savings. 41.3 of those went unfunded, and 28.5 of those positions were actually eliminated off the position control list. We had 7 employees countywide that opted for the retirement incentive that was offered by the Board of Supervisors last year. And 4, 9, 10, 21 employees were laid off, and 5 employees took a 50% reduction in time. And those layoffs and reduction in time netted the general fund a savings of a little over $500,000 and non-general fund in excess of $1 million. We also had concessions from public safety bargaining units. The DSA, the Calaveras County Public Safety Employees Association, sorry, it's a mouthful. The CCP-SEA agreed to pay 5.6% of the PERS employee contribution. The Sheriff's Management agreed to pay 7% of the employee PERS contribution for a total savings of almost $431,000. In addition, the Sheriff contributed over $347,000 in AB 443 funds, and the boards allocated an additional $107,000 in VLF funds to make this all work, to save those positions. So what that meant was we had a general fund budget of nearly $59 million. However, part of that was related to jail construction costs and the jail bond. In fact, $20 million of it was directly related as that money moved through the general fund out to capital projects. So if you remove that $20 million, that kind of skews it. The adjusted general fund budget was $38,923,000. That was a decrease of $3.5 million or 8.3% over the prior year. The general fund cash carry was down to 183, which is an 88% decrease over the prior fiscal year's cash carry of $1.3 million. We included contingencies of $450,000, and additionally the board budgeted a transfer to increase general fund reserves in the amount of $507,000. So when we're looking at mid-year, we're looking at the county finances. We're reviewing expenditures and revenues to look at current trends, to see what that means at mid-year, not only at mid-year, but at fiscal year end. So we have some idea where we're going to end up. We asked departments to do detailed analysis of their budgets, giving us projections of where they think their revenue is going to be at fiscal year end. And we can see where it is at mid-year, but we wanted to know what they thought was going to impact their budgets, both in revenues and expenditures, and what that status would be come fiscal year end. We also looked at a number of economic indicators that tells us how the economy is doing in affecting our revenue streams. And we're continuing to monitor the state fiscal crisis, which is ever-changing. So if in a perfect world, mid-year revenues and expenditures would be at 50% at 12/31. However, it's less than a perfect world. So the revenues that we've received to date are about $14.5 million, or 37% of where we would expect to be. Expenditures we've incurred are $18.7 million, or 46.8% of where we would expect to be. And we've outspent the revenues received by about $4.2 million. However, that's not unusual in the first half of the year for a number of reasons. So what are some of those reasons? Well, as you know, property taxes come in December, and they also come in April. The VLF revenues come in January, and they come in May. So you're going to be missing those revenues the first half of the year. The same way with tobacco settlement money, that comes in the second half of the year, as does the sales and use and lieu fees, franchise fees, and some other revenues that we only see in the second half of the year. We're also seeing delays in state and federal allocations and grant reimbursements, meaning the state's taking longer to reimburse those grants that are we have with the state, and their reimbursable grants. We have to incur the expenses first, then apply to have them reimbursed by the state. Due to economic conditions, the interest earned is not what we expected, and so we're seeing decreases there. Our expenditures are higher because most of our insurance premiums, with the exception of unemployment insurance premiums, are paid in the first month of the fiscal year in July. Unemployment is paid quarterly. And transfers to and from designated funds either occur as the revenues come in or the expenditures occur, or they occur as a whole at fiscal year end. So that also would impact whether or not we are showing 50% of revenues and expenditures. But not all good news. If county fiscal trends continue in taking into those revenues that come into the second half of the year and the expenses that have occurred in the first half of the year, we feel that the revenues are projected to be about a little over $1 million less than what we had hoped they would be for this fiscal year. Fortunately, expenditures are also down, according to the department's reports, of $366,000 for an estimated loss to the general fund of over $700,000. Now, we do have $450,000 in contingencies and money set aside to transfer to reserves, and we'll kind of talk about that a little bit later. So what are we looking at in the way of highlighting our revenues? Well, in the unassigned revenues, which are in your non-departmental budgets, is the secured property taxes. I asked the auditor's office to provide me or our office with an update on property tax revenues for the second half of the year. And based on their projections, they think the revenues will actually, for current secured, will be about $94,000 higher than was budgeted. Unfortunately, that's offset by your current supplemental secured taxes, which will go down by $84,000. Franchise fees, we've received one for cable TV, and that is $10,000 higher than we expected. We have not yet received the franchise fees for PG&E, but we feel that they will come in at least at what we had budgeted. Vehicle license fees, or VLF, is decreasing over $162,000, and interest earned for the general fund, a decrease of $170,000. In looking at economic indicators and consumer spending, the National Bureau of Economic Research pronounced in, I think it was December of 2008, that we were in fact in a recession and had been since 2007. While many economists believe that the severe global recession is ending, it's going to be a slow recovery. Real estate and construction, the markets are still weak. Retail sales are very sluggish. Unemployment remains high, and the feeling is there will be no significant decline in unemployment until consumer confidence returns and starts buying at a higher level. Everything that I've read and the projections I see are for a slow recovery over a number of years. Nationwide unemployment in December 2009, the unemployment rate was 10%, reflecting a job market struggling to recover. The state's unemployment rate was 12.4, with the counties at 15.2. That's the high. I went back through EDD's records to find out when our county's unemployment rate was that high, and last time was March of '93. And there's an 18-month graph of what unemployment rates have done, the red one being the county, the blue the state, and the green one the national. As you can see, it's been a pretty steady climb. So property taxes. At one point we were seeing a strong real estate market with a lot of growth, and as a result our property tax rolls were growing at double digits, 11, 12%, one year I think it was 17%. And that means that our revenues grew for the current secured taxes. In 05-06 it grew by $1.3 million. In 06-07 by $2.1 million, in 07-08 by $1.3 million, and then we saw a very small increase of 0.79% to the rolls in 08-09, which really grew the revenue only $118,000. The 2009 assessed rolls declined 3.31% for a decrease in current secured revenues of about $586,000. The assessors projecting a 7 to 10% decline in the assessed property tax rolls for 2010. And that if it decreases by 10%, we're looking at $1 million decline in revenue. So consumer spending revenue projections. The sales and use tax, we're doing a little bit better than we projected at budget, and our projections were, and we tried to be very conservative given what the trends were. We looked at those trends carefully. So our projections in the 9-10 budget were based on those trends. And the sales and use tax, we're projected to receive about $50,000 more than we budgeted. However, that's a 5.8% decrease from 08-09, and it's a 32.9% decrease from our 5-year high in fiscal year 06-07, a decrease of nearly $957,000. Prop 172, public safety, which is based on statewide sales tax, it's projected to receive about $50,000 less than what we budgeted, kind of offsetting there. Again, it's a almost a 13.5% decrease from 08-09, and a 24.7% decrease from a 5-year high in 07-08 for a loss of about $441,000. The TRT, we're projected to receive a little bit less, about $24,000 less than budgeted, but that will still be a slight increase over 08-09 of about $7,000. And, but it's a 9.5% decrease from the 5-year high in 05-06 of nearly $40,000. And as you know, the TRT goes, a portion stays in the general fund, a portion goes to road, and a portion goes to tourism via the Visitors Bureau. Property transfer taxes, we're on target to receive what was budgeted. And that's a slight increase over 08-09, but it's a nearly 70% decrease from the 5-year high in 05-06 of nearly $700,000. And there's kind of a chart that pretty much says the revenues. We saw good revenues in 05-06, they were climbing, and in 07-08, with the beginning of the recession, they started dropping off. Construction development is another indicator of how the economy is doing, and unfortunately those markets are still weak. The building permit fees are on target for this year. Again, it was a conservative estimate. If we meet that target, it will be a very slight decrease over 08-09 of less than 1%. But if you look at fiscal year 05-06, it's down nearly 64%, nearly $1.3 million. Sewage system application fees, we're expecting about $11,000 more than budgeted, and that's a slight increase over 08-09. But again, it's a decrease of nearly 58% from a high in 05-06, or almost $190,000. Planning application fees, again, we're on target for the year. However, this is a 23% decrease over last year and a 75% decrease over the high in 05-06. And once again, a graph of the 5-year trends for building fees, sewage fees, and planning application fees. And from where they were in 05-06 to where we currently are is a pretty significant difference. Realigning sales tax and DLF. So far, we've received 45% of the $119,000 that was budgeted. Realignment revenues are again tied to consumer spending. Timber tax, we're about 8% of where we would expect to be, or $4,000 out of $60,000. This is one of the most difficult revenues to project. The years we project low, we get more money. The years we project what we got the prior year, it drops down. There's no real rhyme or reason. Well, there is, but rural and small county law enforcement, the AB 443 money. Prior to this fiscal year, It was a single allocation of $500,000 that was received in the beginning of the year. With the adoption of the state budget, the funding mechanism for this changed slightly, and the increase to the VLF, a portion of that went into a local public safety and protection account, out of which the AB 443 funds are paid. At 12/31, we'd only received one quarter's payment of about $90,000, I think it was maybe 96. And we have since the end of, since mid-year, received a second quarter's payment of about $106,000, and we will at least receive a third quarter prior to the end of the fiscal year. So what are the expenditures doing? We kind of categorize this by function, and we'll start with land use. The building department is 42% expended, or $450,000 of a little over $1 million budgeted. And some of the things that have affect this is those transfers to designated fund. The money that comes in for nuisance abatement is budgeted as a transfer out, and that usually happens towards the end of the year. It's a fee-based department, not supported by general fund. The planning department is about 33% expended, or $611,000 of the $1.8 million budget. Again, the decreases are in transfers to designated funds. Money comes in for environmental impact report contracts. Those money are transferred out to the designated funds. Then as those expenditures occurs, the money comes back in from the designated fund. So if the revenues are down for EIR reports, then the expenditure is also down. Also, the general plan update budgeted costs that were not 50% expended at mid-year are expected to be fully expended by fiscal year end. On-site sewage is about 33% expended, or $103,000 of $311,000 budgeted, and there's salary savings due to unfilled and budgeted positions. Environmental health, which included agricultural and environmental management, collectively are about 50% expended, so they're about where they would be expected to be. The Sheriff's Department budget we looked at as a whole. Sheriff's Operations, Dispatch, CNU, Marine Safety, Jail, CalMet, OES, and Animal Services. And collectively, 41% has been expended, or a little over $5.8 million for $14 million budgeted. Now, this budget also includes the appropriations for RIMS software, MDT, and the microwave project. So those are capital project costs, and may account for some of being under 50%, shall we say. Also, in the report from the Sheriff's Department, there was a plan by OES to freeze major grant expenditures, allowing the reimbursement of those grants to catch up so that there's not a severe impact to the general fund cash carry at year end. In probation, they're 52% expended, or over $1 million of a $2 million budget. Again, there was the chief probation officer retired, requiring a payout, and this was done prior to mid-year, so accounting for a little bit over 50% expended at that point in time. The district attorney's office includes the DA witness, victim witness, and child abuse vertical prosecution grant. They are about 50% expended, or $131,000 of $1.6 million. The one note on this budget is that we learned that the child abuse vertical prosecution grant will receive $22,500 less than expected. However, the district attorney believes that he can make up or offset that decrease in revenue with salary savings. The coroner is 61% expended, or $96,000 of $156,000 budget, and we'll be looking for a mid-year budget adjustment of approximately $40,000. This is tied directly to professional and specialized services autopsies. And when I looked at it at mid-year, I thought, oh, well, he can make it to the third quarter. Unfortunately, when I looked at the account summaries, that the coroner's request, he has about $6,000 left in that line item, so we will be looking to the board to increase that line item as part of budget adjustments when we return to the committee of those budget adjustments. Finance and administration includes the Board of Supervisors budget, the CAO's office, assessor, auditor controller, human resources, treasurer tax collector, technology services, GIS, and county council. And collectively, we are 48% expended, or nearly $3.1 million of a $6.5 million budget. There will be mid-year budget adjustments requested of about $40,000 to cover the cost of the outgoing CAO's payout and the interim CAO portion, as well as a budget adjustment based on the board action that was taken earlier today. Insurance, the insurance is 72% expended, or $1.8 million of a $2.6 million budget. Now, this is not unusual, as I mentioned earlier. Premiums are paid at the beginning of the year, and those are some pretty significant premiums: workers' comp, property insurance premiums, and quarterly unemployment insurance costs. We're watching those very, very closely. Those are increasing. We believe that we have some savings in our workers' comp premium to cover some of that. HR and risk management is watching those premiums closely to make sure that it doesn't spike unexpectedly. As you know, because of COBRA and extensions and the extension of time allotted that people can collect unemployment benefits, those costs go up.
Shirley, before you leave that, may I just ask a quick question? I thought when the federal government extended all the unemployment benefits that the federal government was paying the cost of those extensions. What you're saying is that no, either the private companies or whatever the entity is that from which they were laid off are paying it?
They reimburse the cost of COBRA, not of unemployment.
Okay.
The clerk recorder elections budget was 33% expended, $456,000 of a nearly $1.4 million budget. And educational, recreation, and cultural, that's your library, your television adult tutoring, farm advisor, and the museum is about 49% expended. County contributions, this is the transfer out to non-general fund departments, is about 9% expended, or $2 million of $23 million, but remember, the $23 million includes $20 million for capital projects for the jail construction. Also, the transfers for roads for VLF and occur when the revenue is posted in the general fund in January and May. General fund contingencies as of 12/31/09. There were no draws on contingencies. The $450,000 was still balanced. However, as I mentioned, as I was going through the expenditures, the coroner is requesting an additional appropriation, as is the county administrative office. Also, it may be needed to cover shortfalls if we land where we expect to land at the end of the fiscal year. The general fund reserves, the board, under direction that final budget, included a transfer to increase reserves of a little over $100,000. That would occur at the end of the fiscal year, and again, that may be needed to address the revenue shortfall. And I'm just going to briefly go through the non-general fund departments. Public Works, I kind of lump them together because administration and the Equipment Service Center has expenditures, and then they're offset by charges out to their other departments for their services. So it was easier just to include administration, land development, Equipment Service Center, and roads all in one budget. One total. Cash carry at 6/30/09 was nearly $3.3 million. At mid-year, their revenues they've received has been about 15.3%, and they've expended about 24.6%, with mid-year expenditures receiving revenues by about $1.9 million. The money that received from the general fund is tied to TOT and BLS. Otherwise, the money comes through the state. Integrated Waste Management, their cash carry at 6/30/09 was $709,000. Their mid-year revenues are running about 36.7%, with expenditures at 31.8% of what was budgeted. That means mid-year revenues exceeded expenditures by $139,000. They are, when we return to the board with the budget adjustments tied to mid-year, they will have some budget adjustments to increase revenues and expenditures, but there is no general fund contribution to integrated waste management. CalWorks and Human Services, their cash carry at 6/30/09 was $998,000. At mid-year, they've received 49.3% of their budgeted revenues, and they've expended 43.5% of what was budgeted. Mid-year revenues exceeded expenditures by about $366,000. The general fund contributions for the county share of their programs are $465,000 for fiscal year 09-10. They also will be looking at mid-year budget adjustments, increasing revenues and expenditures, and this has to do with the med security, the rapid rehousing, the temporary aid to needy families, subsidized employment programs. The revenues will offset the expenditures, and there will be no general fund cost. One of the things in the general budget is looking at deep cuts in safety net programs, especially if he does not get the federal funding, that additional federal funding that he is looking for. And his budget proposal included an additional trigger cut should that money not come through. And at this point, it's really too hard to say what all that means, because we still have a long way to go before we have an adopted budget. And at this point, the legislature was willing to make any further reductions until after the May revise. In the public authority, they had a negative cash balance at 6/30/09, and this just has to do with the way the funding comes in for the public authority. They have to incur the cost and then reimburse it. At mid-year, they've received 25% of expected revenues, and they've expended about 44% of what was budgeted. And again, it has to do with reimbursement and claiming. They claim on a quarterly basis, and it comes in once those claims are submitted. Expenditures have exceeded revenues by about $48,000. The general fund contribution to the public authority is $65,000, and they were not requesting any mid-year budget adjustments. The governor proposes to, in his budget, to limit services to IHSS recipients. He tried this for budget year 09-10, and it's currently being litigated with an injunction preventing implementation. He also sought legislative approval to reduce states' participation in IHSS provider wages, and as Jean mentioned earlier, his initial ruling in court has not allowed that, and he plans to appeal, and he's included it in the current budget proposal. Public health cash carry at June 30th was $1.6 million. Mid-year revenues received has been about 47.8% of what was budgeted. Expenditures equal about 43% of what was budgeted, with mid-year expenditures exceeding revenues by $301,000. Again, has to do with the claiming and reimbursement by the state. But there is no general fund contribution to public health. They noted in their report that they do expect a decrease in revenues of about $110,996, and this is due to decline in revenue in realignment revenue, interest earned, and transfers from designated fund. However, they will be reducing, or they'll have savings in their expenditures to offset that revenue decrease from vacant positions and reduction in services and supplies. Mental health, excuse me, their cash carry at 6/30/09 was 1.2 million. Mid-year revenues are 42% of what was budgeted. Expenditures are at 46% of what was budgeted, with mid-year expenditures exceeding revenues by almost $600,000. The general fund contribution to the mental health budget is $7,189. That's the maintenance of effort required to draw down the realignment revenues. They also are expecting a decrease in revenues of about $176,000. And again, this is interest earned due to decreases in interest earned, realignment sales tax, and transfers from designated funds, which will be offset with salary savings and reductions in services and supplies. The governor is proposing another budget ballot measure in June of 2010 to redirect Mental Health Services Act funds. A similar budget ballot failed in May of 2009. Should it pass, its significant impact to county mental health programs, and the loss of those funds would also, that support the mental health services, would result in the loss of federal funds as well. Substance abuse programs, excuse me, I'm fighting the problem as well. Cash carry at June 2009 was nearly $547,000. At mid-year, 30% of those revenues had been, budgeted revenues had been realized, while expenditures are at 37% of budgeted. Mid-year expenditures exceeded revenues by about $223,000. And like public health, there is their general fund contribution to the substance abuse programs. They also expect a revenue decrease of about $87,000 due to interest earned and a reduction in federal justice assistance grant funds, and this will be offset with reductions in services and supplies. Again, as part of the governor's proposal, he wants to eliminate the substance abuse offender treatment program. And we're just going to touch a little bit on the state budget simply because it's such a constantly moving target. And we really don't have a good feel for what will be happening for 10-11 until May revise comes out. But at the moment, the state is looking at a $9.9 billion deficit across the remainder of this year and into next year. They're requesting $6.9 billion in additional federal funds. And if those aren't received, then the governor has proposed numerous trigger cuts that will severely impact health and human services programs. Some of the solutions that are in this budget have been previously debated, defeated in the May 2009 special elections. Other solutions are litigated in court, and we still don't know the outcome of all of those. So it's really difficult to project what the state budget will look like and what those impacts ultimately will mean for the counties. Two of the things that we're watching closely in the special legislative session, as you mentioned earlier, was the transportation funding swap. The governor initially proposed a funding swap that then the Senate Democrats put forth their own plan. The plans that were finally sent to the governor eliminate sales tax on gasoline only, not on diesel. It institutes an excise tax, but it includes language that holds harmless local streets and roads funding secured under Prop 42. Additionally, the cash management component with payment deferrals to counties. Fortunately for our county, AB X85 was signed by the governor, exempting small counties with populations under 50,000 from the deferrals.
So what do we need to do? Well, we need to take some actions now. I mean, you don't really have a whole lot of choices other than to reduce expenditures or find new revenues. And so what we put together for you is a list of all the things that we think we ought to pursue. The first is we need to aggressively pursue the monies owed the county. And my experience has been the squeaky wheel gets the grease. I know that the behavioral health services staff, fiscal staff is relentless upon the Department of Mental Health to get reimbursement for invoices sent. And oftentimes, if you nag them enough, you are more successful in receiving those funds a bit earlier than you might expect. Because of the way the reimbursement occurs for a number of departments, particularly those that rely on grants where they actually invoice the state after a quarter ends, we're in this situation where the quarter ends the end of March. You have to wait till the auditor's reports come out in April, and then we submit those invoices. But we need to submit those invoices to the state as soon as we possibly can to get our cash flow flowing and get reimbursements to the county as soon as possible. And I think departments have certainly indicated to me that they're doing that and are looking at all their reimbursements carefully. We need to curtail spending, eliminate non-essential expenditures. At a department head meeting yesterday, we had a lengthy discussion, and all departments, I think, are taking a look at this and seeing where they can eliminate spending that they might otherwise have expected to spend, but because of the deficit will not. The board could consider additional mid-year budget reductions. We can encourage the use of voluntary time off. There's a number of departments and staff. This is a discretionary approval item by department heads that if I wanted to volunteer, for example, 2 days a month, I take 2 days where I voluntarily take time off and don't get paid. Some of us actually work on those days, others actually get the time. But it has to be done department by department because different departments have different projects that require staff to be present, but there might be some downtimes where some people could be encouraged to take some time off, and if people are able to do that, it can save some money. We could relook at the retirement incentive package. There were a number of conditions on that retirement incentive package last year that frankly, the non-general fund departments took more advantage of it than the general funds because of the requirement that you had to hold the position open for 3 years. Certainly in behavioral health, we knew we were not going to see additional funding probably for 3 years, so it made sense to allow people to take that. But for some general fund departments, it did not. So I think we could look at that, and I don't have any actual answers for you right now, but perhaps there's a way in working with our workforce and get some ideas from our employees how that might work to incentivize some folks who might be close to retirement who may consider it if there was some type of incentive. I think the board should consider transferring public health realignment funds to CalWorks and Human Services and back out some of the general fund money that's dedicated to social services. That's a way to save some general fund money. Colleen and I have been very prudent about the public health realignment funds. We have held positions vacant, anticipating the general funds need. The board is allowed to transfer 10% of the realignment among accounts for the amount of money that you receive in a given year. It requires a public hearing to be held, but it is one way to provide some additional funds to CalWorks. In terms of revenue, you can, I think we ought to revisit the fee schedules. The board could consider a ballot measure to increase the transit occupancy tax, otherwise known as the motel hotel tax. Visitors that come to our county do use our roads, they use our law enforcement services. So some people could argue that they should help share in the cost of providing those services. I note that recently Tuolumne County just voted to approve an increase from 8% to 10%. The board could reconsider your prior direction when you adopted the final budget in the fall that directed funds to the general fund reserve. As Shirley indicated, that transfer is not generally done until the end of the year, so that has not been done. Those funds are in the budget currently. You could use those funds to bridge the gap right now. Again, you could utilize the general fund contingencies also, so between the general fund reserve and the general fund contingencies, you could fund the budget gap, but you wouldn't have a whole lot left. Now, the economy could get better. We certainly hope it does. We want everyone to please spend locally. When you spend money in the county, if those sales taxes come to our county and help provide the services that you all provide on behalf of the public. We've estimated at this point a cash carry of about $240,000. Depending on the expenditure declines, it could be more. It could be more if there's a little bit more revenue. We don't know if there will be additional state cuts between March and July 1. We just, I don't see that happening based on the discussions at the legislative level at this point, but one never knows. So at this point, that's where we are for the current year. So we've got the current year where we anticipate if we continue on the trend we are, we need to make some plans so that we don't end up with a deficit as of July 1. For next year, 10-11, first we always take a look at the revenue. We always hope that the revenue is going to be a little bit higher than it was in the current year. And unfortunately, the worst news I think I heard was when the acting assessor said, I hate to tell you this, I hate to estimate, but we believe that based on what we're seeing, it's anywhere from a 7 to a 10% devaluation of properties, which is going to result in a loss of anywhere between $700,000 to $1 million. So we took the 10% figure, since it could be 10%, it could be higher, we don't know. And the assessor assures me she'll let us know as soon as she knows anything more to kind of get closer to what actually might be. The VLF revenue that's tied to the property tax, because the property tax is devalued, then you have a loss in VLF revenue as well for an additional hit. Because the non-general fund departments have decreased, eliminated positions, reduced, they also there will be a reduction in the A87 revenue that comes back in to support the general fund departments because there's overall less expenditures on the non-general fund side of the house. We've included that there's a revenue loss due to the lapse of the public safety concessions. The side letter agreements end June 30th, 2009. And so we've assumed that those concessions are off the table, and so the additional cost that we must anticipate is another $455,000 approximately for next fiscal year. We know that there will be increased expenditures related to salaries and benefits. You've got the expiration of the negotiated concessions. You've got basically some people still getting merit and longevity and step increases, just as normal, in agreement with our current MOU. Francine has let us know that the rising unemployment, the COBRA, and the insurance premium costs are going to hit us with a big wallop, anticipating an increase of $625,000 next fiscal year. And risk management is really taking a close look at that, and we'll be analyzing that in the next quarter as well to look at the claims. So I'm hoping there'll be a little bit more there, but don't count on it. I think in terms of actions that we need to do more research on some of the cost reduction strategies that have been used by other counties. And we're a county no different than any other that has been experiencing tremendous pain and gut-wrenching decisions. Some of these items, there's only so many items, although I'm really encouraging employees to come up with new items and ideas for discussion. Certainly, employee pays part of their PERS or all of their PERS, employee contributions. We can look at furloughs. We can look at a reduced work week, which is what Amador County has done with the 36-hour work week, and they're closed on Fridays. They've got some special circumstances that they work around. We understand that many of these items require further discussion with our labor organizations and workforce. And again, these require more really analytical work to figure out what exactly the savings would be. We need to look at consolidating, sharing functions and resources. I think we need to look at what is going to fall off the table in terms of services, non-mandated services. How we provide services to the public and the manner in which it looks may be very different next year. And I think it's going to take a concerted effort with all the departments particularly we've grouped departments in functional groups to be able to talk about how services can be shared or delivered differently given the need for reductions, whether it's workforce, services, supplies, what have you. You can look at a 17.5% reduction to general fund contributions to departments. You know, I don't really like across-the-board cuts, but as a starting point, it's a way for us to get on the table what the magnitude of the cuts would be for each department and be able to address that, what we anticipate is a $3.1 million deficit. I'm suggesting that we do not entertain new positions or reclassification requests. I mean, at this juncture, I think it would require a lot of work that could be better spent on looking at how we might organize ourselves differently, which will require a multidisciplinary approach to looking at structures and across disciplines. The anticipated revenue losses and expenditure increases are about $3.1 million. Again, we do not have control over the state budget. I'd certainly ask all our citizenry to lobby our state legislators to please address the state budget deficit now, not later. The longer it goes on, the harsher the hits are locally. So please help us out and take action now so that we can plan ahead. We hope the revenue increases, that economic conditions, you know, that the writing on the wall, I've read, Shirley's read, the recession's ended, we're headed toward recovery, but we just haven't seen it here locally yet. But certainly we hope our sales tax will increase and some of our businesses will be able to do a little bit better this next coming year. And certainly we have an escalation in the cost of doing business. So those are some of the things that are impacting the 2010-11 budget. It's grim. It requires, I think, due diligence by all of us to work on analyzing every aspect of our revenues and expenditures to see what we might change or do differently next year to continue to serve the citizens of the county and also look at what services we should be providing and then what also perhaps the private sector should provide and the county should no longer provide. Those are always things that I think we have to put in the mix. So with that, I'd like some board direction. And Shirley and I are here to answer any questions you might have.
What I'm going to do is ask the board if they have any questions or comments. I will open it up for any public or staff comments. Then I will bring it back to the board to hopefully give some direction to staff on the 9/10 budget. Are there any board questions or comments at this point? Yes.
Admittedly, this is kind of like a very small finger in a fairly large hole in the dike, but when I was on the Calaveras Leadership Group, we took a hard look at TOT, the possibility of raising that, and I think that it certainly is very apparent to most people that it would produce some benefits to raise the tax from the current fairly low rate at 6 to 8 or 10 or whatever. But when you look at the raw, the amount of taxes currently being collected at $1.2 million for the entire county, 800,000 of that comes from the city of Angels, and it struck me that there's bound to be a significant amount of spillage, or the taxes that are perhaps being collected by cabin owners or private citizens that rent out their homes or cabins for the weekends that aren't either they may be collecting it but they aren't paying it. And when I talked to Lynn Norfolk about this, about how we could go about tracking that a little bit more closely, she said it became an issue of how much money do you want to spend to get this additional potential revenue expansion. We just approved some a couple of positions for the administration, for your, is there any possibility that one of these positions or both of them could be dedicated to try to formulate a plan that we could identify, first of all, if there is spillage? Here's an article that I saw about the Colorado ski towns are beginning to reinforce their or reinforce, but enforce their rental lodging taxes. That they've recognized that there's a significant revenue opportunity that they're missing back in Colorado. And my question to you is, are we missing that here? Should we look at that first before taking off and going on the expansion of the TOT?
Well, we can certainly put it on our list for things to look at, and I can talk to the treasurer tax collector to see, how audits are currently performed to see when, how that works, and we can report back to you. I don't know when the last audit was done of the TOT. In terms of spillage, I probably have to have a longer conversation with you about how you define spillage. I mean, Angels Camp has a 10% TOT, we have a 6% TOT. There's a significant difference there in just the rate that's charged to motel beds. So there's going to account for some of the difference. So are you talking about, are we collecting from everybody we should be collecting from?
That's
Is that spillage?
Suggested.
Okay.
That's what I'm talking about.
I think we can look at that, and certainly we should. Because that's a revenue, I mean, it's on the books that people should be paying the 6%, and if the county's not realizing that for whatever reason, we should take measures to address it.
I would expect, fully expect that there would be a certain amount of pushback on, when people hear that the county's going to go after this, is, oh my God, we're all dying on the vine, so why go after that? But I don't know. I don't have the answer to my question, of course, but I think it bears looking into.
Well, I know the property managers in the Ebbets Pass Corridor, which have a huge number, those that manage properties do report their TOT because they came to the board and discussed it before. So I'd want to know, are we talking about an owner renter versus going through property managers? But Lynn's discussed this with us before about slip